All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give people a couple more minutes just to get logged on, but you are here for the Houseplant webinar. I'm very excited to talk to you today, but get comfortable, maybe get a pad of paper and a pen, maybe some water, and just kind of get comfy while we let everyone log in today. All right, we're going to give just a couple more minutes to some people just to make sure everyone gets in. They don't miss anything. Again, just sit back, get comfy, and get ready to learn. All right, so looks like we still have some people logging in here. I'll give them one more minute. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Best of Houseplants and sort of an insight in our Chalet RARE collection. My name is Maddy Dubelko. I'm a horticulturist here. I just graduated from MSU with my master's degree. And before that, I actually attended Purdue University and got a degree in landscape design. So boiler up and go green. All right, and so today I'm going to talk to you about the best of houseplants, kind of go over my favorites and even kind of talk about some houseplant essentials. But first, I want to kind of talk to you guys about, let's get this set up here, about why we like houseplants in the first place before we even get into the meat of the presentation. I think a lot of you can agree houseplants improve our indoor space. They're a great decoration, but they also have some actual benefits as well. So a few studies from NASA have actually shown that houseplants can improve air quality. And while it's not the same as like a HEPA filter or, some sort of open window, it can help reduce the amount of toxic chemicals in the air, like formaldehyde, benzene, acetone, some things that can build up from like cleaners, stuff like that. A lot of studies from various scientists in various institutions have shown that being out in nature can really help reduce anxiety and stress. And a lot of scientists agree, and a lot of studies have shown that when you bring that greenery, those plants inside, it has that same effect. Lowered blood pressure, lowered heart rate, things like that. And finally, houseplant collecting and houseplant care is just a fun hobby, and I think that's why you're all here today. All right, so here's sort of how the presentation is going to go today. To kick it off, I'm going to talk about picking the best houseplant for you when you consider your home environment and your lifestyle. I'm going to go into some beginner-friendly plants. I'm going to talk about some of my favorites and some of my picks. And we're going to talk about the RARE collection by Chalet, and then I'm going to talk about some houseplant essentials that I think would be very useful for any houseplant owner. All right, so pick the houseplant that is best for you. And first thing I want to talk about when thinking about any houseplant purchase is your home environment. Plants are going to do best in environments that they are comfortable, and that's how they're going to grow quickly and healthily. First thing to consider is your light source and your light. This is how plants make their food. It's how they, grow and all of that. So consider your light source. Is it a window? Do you have grow lights? You want to think about if there's direct or indirect light, and what that sort of means is if there's sort of like a direct sunbeam or direct beam of light from like a lamp or something, or if you have indirect light, that's sort of more diffused, you can't really see much of a shadow. You also want to think about duration. If you, you know, have 1 to 2 hours of sun, you really shouldn't be buying full sun plants as a rule, just because, you know, you're only getting that direct sunlight for 1 to 2 hours, and they really like having sun all day. Temperature and humidity is another consideration. Generally, if you are comfortable, your plant is going to be comfortable. A lot of these plants are popular because of their ability to thrive in what we call room temperature. Think about it as well, if you have any drafty windows, doors, or vents, certain plants are really sensitive to this. And think about if you have any appliances that give off heat. Some plants actually like this, some plants don't. And then before I kind of get too far in, I do want to say, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I will get to them at the end of the presentation. All right. Next thing to consider in your home environment is your space. How much space do you actually have? Do you want a big snake plant? Do you want a big palm tree? Or do you just want little things for your windowsill? Generally, try and pick a place that's easily accessible to you, and it's not a huge deal if you spill a little bit of water. It will happen when you're watering your plants. You know, tables, shelves are also a good option, but also consider if you have any pets or small children. Can they access your plants? This is something very important to think about, as some plants can actually be quite toxic. So again, just think about that. Think about who's in your home. A good resource is actually the ASPCA. It has an online database of toxic and non-toxic plants for, I believe, dogs, cats, even horses. So if you have a cat like mine, pictured here, he definitely likes to sample all the plants I bring in. So I in particular have to be careful. So again, I want you guys to have this information. Definitely look it up. It's really a great website. Next, let's talk about your lifestyle. Think about, you know, your schedule and how much time you can dedicate to your houseplant. This includes watering, this includes fertilizing, and pruning as well. I've had professors in both MSU and Purdue who, you know, they were professors in horticulture, they study plants, and they have dead house plants in their offices because they're either never there, or they just never think about it, or they just don't have time to, you know, give their plants water. And think about too, when you're sort of thinking about this lifestyle, do you tend to overwater houseplants that you already have, or you tend to underwater? I feel like there are a lot of people who, you know, are always like kind of giving their plants drinks, and then they get mushy and they come to me and they're like, oh no, like what's wrong? But then there are other people who, you know, don't water their plants at all. Things get a little bit crispy. And I'll say I'm one of these people. I'm definitely an underwatering person. So just think about that, and that can really factor into your houseplant decision. If things like to be moist, and you're an overwaterer, that's probably a match made in heaven. All right. And then once you've kind of like, you know, if you've gone through this webinar, you've done some research, you know what plants you want, and you're at the nursery, we want to make sure we're selecting a healthy plant as well. So some things to keep in mind when you're looking around, looking at the individual plants. Ask yourself if you kind of see any discolored leaves or broken stems, moldy soil, or like any signs of insects. These can be indicators that the plant may not be very healthy, and you may want to try and like see if there's a better one around, or even ask whether you're at Chalet or somewhere else, just ask about like, hey, like I see this thing here, is this a concern? Stuff like that. People will definitely help you out, especially our experts here at Chalet. Getting quality plants, I do think, is the key to success, especially when you're a beginner. When you get more advanced and you're trying to revive plants, and maybe there's like a discount rack somewhere, then, you know, you can sort of circumvent this rule. But in my mind, if you're a beginner, getting a quality plant is the key to success. And one more thing to check is to see if your plant is well rooted. I like to kind of like tug on the stem a little bit, and if it seems securely in there, that usually means it has a good root system and it hasn't just been a recently stuck cutting, or, you know, it's having some rooting issues and stuff like that. So definitely try and make sure everything's secure, there's not anything broken and stuff like that. All right, and then taking your houseplant home. And I can definitely, I've seen a lot of customers who just want to throw their plant in the car and call it good and leave, go to dinner and all that stuff. Really, when you take your houseplant home, you want to try and get it to your space as soon as possible. So you want to protect it. When you when you put your plants in your car, try and make sure they're secure from tipping or breakage and stuff like that. I've definitely done this before, but I've seen a lot of people, just throw their houseplant in and then they hit a hard stop and then the stem breaks and it's a whole thing. And again, I'm a victim of this too. I've definitely done this. If it's below 50 degrees outside, try and have your plants wrapped up in paper. This will help shield them from the cold. A lot of houseplants don't like to be below 50 or so degrees. You can also use plastic, but try and remove the plastic as soon as you get home. It can cause some condensation issues and maybe even some rotting issues. So again, if it's in plastic, remove it from the plastic as soon as possible. If you can, isolate your new plants from your existing collection. This can kind of help identify any disease or any bugs that may have hopped on your plant along the way. And get to know your houseplant, monitor the water level until you kind of can get into a routine. So I wouldn't necessarily say water your plant all the time, but it helps so many issues. It prevents overwatering. It lets any excess watering or water drain out, and that really prevents a lot of issues. I've had a lot of people come to the information center and contact me through Zendesk or email or phone, and they're like, oh, like my soil is really wet, I have mold. Drainage in pots really resolves a lot of those issues, and especially for beginners, it's my #1 recommendation, pots with drainage holes. All right, so with all of that in mind, I want to talk about some beginner-friendly plants. And what I kind of mean by beginner-friendly is compared to some other houseplants, they have less susceptibility to pests and diseases. There's not really a lot of special care instructions. You don't need to do any special pruning or have special lighting or use special water or fertilizer. These plants can also be very forgiving. You can forget to water them or overwater them a few times and they're not going to immediately keel over. And they can also handle a lot of different light conditions. So first up, I want to talk about the classic snake plant. These plants really like low light. They tolerate drought in the long term. And they come in a lot of different variations and colors. You can kind of see on screen here, I have the sort of classic looking houseplant, but then I also have a spikier one that's called the starfish variety. Something different, but it has the same amount of care. They're really easy to divide and propagate. So when you kind of master houseplant care and your plant is flourishing, you can divide it in half and you have 2 plants. You could give one to a friend or keep them to yourself. My #1 care tip with snake plants is when in doubt, do not water them. The only time I've seen snake plants die is from overwatering and frost damage. So don't leave them outside during the winter and let them dry out. They like the drought. All right, next up we have the ZZ plant. These are really great for low light areas like offices and stuff. I've seen a lot of people say they only need a fluorescent lamp and they're good to go. I would say try and get them sun as possible. But again, if you're in an office and you need a little plant friend, ZZ plants are probably the plant for you. Snake plants also do this, but they're one of the plants that is known to purify the air from toxic chemicals like benzene, formaldehyde, acetone, all these nasty little cleaning chemicals that maybe we don't want to be breathing in. Again, very sturdy plants. Make sure to use a well-draining potting mix to prevent root rot. Otherwise, it's a sturdy plant. It'll survive pretty much anything, as I've seen. Next up, we have the Pothos, which is another classic houseplant. I don't think I know a houseplant enthusiast that has not ever had a Pothos. It's available in many different colors, patterns. It's really easy to propagate, and so much so that my main care tip for this guy is if you have any broken stems, stick them in soil or water to propagate them. If you kind of stick them back in the pot, it kind of creates like a fuller look up top. So that's my main tip for you. Again, my grandma has one of these, my mom has one of these, my dad has one of these, and he doesn't even care for it, and it looks great. All right, I couldn't get through this presentation without talking about cacti and succulents. They're really popular here at Chalet. They're desert plants, so they really like a lot of light and not a lot of water. Drainage is especially important with these plants. So if you do get some cacti and succulents, this is the one requirement with cacti and succulents that cannot be worked around. You need to have drainage if you want to keep these plants for a long time. There are many different colors and sizes, shapes available. So definitely come check out our selection, but really any place is going to have a variety of colors and all that. It's really fun to make little dish gardens out of them. The flowers themselves, if you get something to flower, they're vibrantly colored. It's really exciting. My care tips: keep the soil dry. Only water when the soil is bone dry. A lot of people say water once a month. This is going to change depending on how humid your house is, how much light they get, and stuff like that. So I won't give you an exact schedule, but make sure the soil is totally bone dry throughout. And then once the soil is dry and it's time to water, make sure you water it completely. Don't just mist it. Give it a good drink, because this is the only time it's going to get water, and it wants to store it all. English ivy is another great beginner house plant. It grows really fast. It's actually an indoor and an outdoor plant. It's used in the landscape industry as well as a ground cover. So with that in mind, if you have to take any cuttings or are trimming your plant, make sure those cuttings go in the garbage and not your compost. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of English ivy around in your yard or your potted plants. Again, really fast growing. This can actually filter bacteria from the air. So maybe it's a good choice for the bathroom or someplace a little bit gross. But again, really easy to care for. It likes a lot of bright light. And really, you can train it onto different forms, up your walls, around your windows. It's really fun to kind of, make a little creative thing out of it. If your plant gets a little bit woody because the stem is really thick, I recommend using pruners if you have to cut a part off. Just makes it a lot easier, and then you're not dulling your scissors. Okay, let's see here. So my own houseplant picks. So I kind of just put together some of my favorites. Some of them I own, some of them are my wish list plants. But most of these are still pretty easy to care for. Some of them are maybe a little bit more advanced. I'll point those out when we get there. All right. Fiddle Leaf Fig is something that has been very popular here at Chalet. It has giant leaves. It's really cool. It's a really unique texture. In the wild, these plants can actually get up to 50 feet tall. They like bright indirect light, and the care is really similar to a ficus or a rubber tree, if you're familiar with those. Make sure to kind of keep them from any drafts or dramatic temperature changes that can kind of cause the leaves to drop. If you don't have the space, but you kind of want the look, we actually do sell a little fiddle, which is a dwarf version. It grows a lot slower, and it has sort of leaves that are maybe about like that big, but still very cool. Another tip with this, if you're kind of looking for a more tree-like form, ask for something called a standard form. That's sort of indicating it has a trunk and branches that sort of branch out at the top. So again, it's that tree form. Pictured here, we have the bush form. And then there's another sort of form that I don't think has an official name, but it's just sort of straight up and down. That's what the smaller plants usually come as. Each of those have their own look and application. And again, this is a really cool plant. It's really fun. It likes a lot of humidity, and it kind of just adds a little jungle look to your space. Heartleaf philodendrons are another classic. Care is very similar to a pothos. Again, if something breaks off, you can kind of just stick it back up in the top, and no one will ever know. It's easy to propagate, easy to grow. Sometimes if the plant's in a more humid environment, it'll grow aerial roots, the little white projections from each little node where the leaf is coming out. Again, those are nothing to worry about. The plant's just really liking the moisture in the air. Main care tip with this guy is use a well-draining potting soil. I personally have had a lot of issues where if I put this plant in, a soil that doesn't really dry out, or I put it in something that doesn't have any drainage, it kind of has a lot of root rot issues. At least that's my experience. So again, well-draining potting soil, likes a lot of different light conditions, and it comes in a lot of cool forms. There's actually a variegated version called a Brazil Philodendron, and that also looks really cool. African violets are another classic house plant. A lot of people are scared of these because they have so many watering requirements, but they can reward you with their blossoms. They're not actually related to the violets or pansies we plant outside. They're actually completely different genus and family, but they come in just as many colors. My main recommendation for sort of simplifying the care of these is to use one of those self-watering pots where the water kind of comes up from the bottom. You should avoid getting any water on the leaves, and if you kind of have a situation where you can, have the plant absorb water from the bottom of the pot, it makes it a whole lot easier. Be sure to try and use room temperature water. This plant doesn't really like to be cold, and keep it away from cold windows. That can cause some issues as well. These are also really easy to propagate. If you have any leaves that break off, you can use a little bit of rooting hormone, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and just stick them back in the soil and it'll have a little baby plant. All right, peperomias. This is another good group of plants for people who may not have a lot of space, or people who kind of like to collect similar but different plants. Peperomias have like a big spectrum of looks and foliage here. So pictured here, I have the watermelon peperomia, and I believe the rough rugosa peperomia. Again, a lot of different colors, a lot of different shapes. All the peperomias tend to stay pretty compact. They're pretty easy to divide and propagate. All you really need is a leaf and a little bit of rooting hormone, and you can have another plant in, a matter of a couple months. My main care tip is to hold off on repotting these guys until absolutely necessary. They grow pretty slow, they stay pretty compact. And if you kind of like try and schedule the repotting of these guys, you can really have some issues with root rot, transplant shock and stuff like that. So again, really only repot them when it's absolutely necessary, like the plot is tipping over, the roots are growing out of the bottom of the pot, and it's drying out too quickly. All right, Phylodentrine Perkins are another really beautiful houseplant. This was on my wish list for a really long time, and I finally got one. And it's been rewarding me with new growth and new leaves. I'm very excited about it. It has beautiful striped foliage. The striping is a lot more apparent on newer leaves. It has an upright habit, unlike the vining philodendron that I showed you earlier. It's slow growing, so if you don't see a lot of new growth when you first get it, that's not a problem. It just takes its time, and it can mature. This plant can actually get up to 3 feet tall. And main care tip for this guy, it likes bright indirect light. Let it dry out between waterings, and it'll reward you with its beauty. Here I have sort of a close-up of the actual foliage. This is my personal plant at home, and you can kind of see how the newer leaves have that more white striping, and then the older ones kind of get more green as they mature. Monsteras. Monstera deliciosa is one of the most trendy plants of the past couple years. As it matures, the leaves get more complex. It's pretty fast growing. I bought a plant about 6 months ago that was about this size in the photo. And in a minute, I'll show you what it looks like right now, but it grows as a vine. So you may want to use a moss pole to keep the plant upright. Otherwise, it kind of starts to spread out of the pot. Some people don't mind this, but if you want sort of a neater look, this is a great option. Make sure this again dries out between waterings. It's related to philodendrons. So again, it likes kind of like staying moist, but then completely drying out. So here is my plant at home. So this pretty much tripled in size after I bought it. Again, it's really been rewarding. You can kind of see the spectrum of the leaf shape here. Some of them are more whole. A lot of them have like sort of that more cut leaf in there. And as they mature, they get even more like beautiful, and the leaves even get more complex. All right, next up is the bird's nest fern. This is actually a really good option if you have cats or dogs. This is a pet-friendly plant. Similar to the Staghorn Fern, which I'll talk about in a minute. This can be mounted on things like boards, rocks, stuff like that. It's used to growing in trees, so it's considered a epiphytic plant. The vibrant green foliage has wavy edges. Main thing to keep in mind with this one is if it gets dry, the edges can kind of get brown and crispy. So try and use some distilled water to prevent any, issues with minerals or chlorine and building up in the soil, and keep a humid environment. And this is really just generally with any fern, they like low light, they like to stay wet. So again, if you're an overwaterer, this is a great option for you. Staghorn ferns, again, these are really cool. They have like a sculptural foliage. I've seen a lot of people mount them as if they were, some sort of deer head, because it has that like little antler-like look. They can be mounted on basically any surface. They grow on trees like the bird's nest fern. So again, they're considered that epiphyte type of plant. They are really easy. I find them easy to maintain, but again, some people, if you're a forgetful water, this may not be an option, but again, if you like to water your plants a lot, this is great. Make sure to maintain good air circulation in a humid environment, and this plant will reward you. So these are my Staghorn ferns at home, and what I sort of mean by keeping a humid environment, you can see it with the smaller plant here. I have sort of that brown leaf structure there. That is because I did let the plant dry out, and I did let my humidifier run out of water, and it isn't super happy, but it's coming back. Up here I also have another one hanging up. This one's a lot more happy. It's sort of near a fan, so it got a lot of good air circulation, but again, it still kept that humidity. All right, we also have the rubber tree. This is really easy to care for in low light situations. I've seen a lot of people get like a different colors and different varieties, and it kind of all looks cool mixed in together. We sort of have like a camouflage variegation here. We have the burgundy type with those dark leaves, and then we have sort of that plain green, but I believe this is actually like a little Meyer, or not a Meyer lemon, like a little lemon something. That I forget what the variety is called, but this is just a super cool. You can kind of see it in the photos here. It's got a little bit of variegation. There are many different colors and patterns available of this plant. And in the wild, this can actually grow to about 100 feet tall. It's not going to get that tall in your home, but it's still really fun. It grows fairly quickly. And my main care tip, things to keep in mind here is it thrives in bright indirect light. And if you break off any of the stems or the leaves, it can have this like sticky latex sap. So if you have a latex allergy or sensitive skin, you may want to try and use gloves when handling this plant. And if you do get any sticky latex on anything, try and wipe it off before it dries. I've let it dry onto like tools and stuff before, and it's just a lot harder to get off. All right. So now we are going to get into our rare collection here at Chalet. These are kind of one-of-a-kind plants. They look really cool, and they may be sort of hard to get your hands on. And our buyers sort of hand pick these from different growers. So we have, for the more beginner houseplant person who may need a plant that's a little bit more easy to care for, we have the Raven ZZ plant. The care is exactly the same as a regular ZZ plant, but it has a beautiful dark foliage, maintains that upright habit. And like the Raven ZZ plant, it filters out chemicals from the air. So if you have that concern, this is another great option. Something to keep in mind is that new growth will kind of emerge lime green. That's okay. That's just how it works. And then the foliage will darken as it gets older. So another good thing to keep in mind here is, again, well-draining potting mix. If your Raven ZZ plant isn't as dark as you would like it to be, try moving it to a more well-lit location, and that should darken the leaves. Next up, we have the silver sword philodendron. This is actually a plant that's native to Brazil. It's been in our rare collection for a little bit, but I just think it looks so cool with those silvery leaves. It grows fairly quickly, and the care is very similar to other philodendrons. So if you kind of collect philodendrons, you can kind of just use the same care scheme as all the other ones. It kind of has that vining habit, so maybe you should get it a moss pull if you want it to go upright, or if you kind of want it to be a little bit of a hanging basket situation, it'll be great for that as well. Again, use a well-draining potting mix, make sure you have a drainage hole, but again, it'll be really striking and really beautiful in any houseplant collection. Next up, we were kind of going for more of the vines here. I'm going to talk about Piper crocodum. This is a really cool plant that we've had here at Chalet before, but it is really interesting because it has that sort of pink and green foliage. It's native to South America, and it naturally forms some crystals on the back of the leaves, which I'll talk about in a second. That's nothing to be concerned about. It does that naturally, and that's just what this plant does. It's not an indication of sickness or any pest problem. It likes bright indirect light, and it thrives in a humid environment. So maybe even give it a moss pull, it would really latch onto that and sort of grow upwards. But again, if you want it to kind of be sort of a vining, hanging type thing, it'll be perfectly happy as well. And here you can kind of see those crystals. They might be white, they might be black, but again, super normal, super common for this plant. All right, black velvet alocasia. This is a really beautiful plant. It kind of almost looks like it's out of a cartoon in a sense. It has that dark green foliage with that bright midrib. It likes to be a little bit pot bound, so hold off on repotting it until absolutely necessary. Like I said, with those peperomias, it likes to kind of dry out and stay a little bit dry between waterings. So again, if you're a forgetful waterer, this is another great option, and it looks really cool. Give it bright indirect light, and it does like a little bit of a humid environment. So if you have a humidifier, this would be another great plant to put kind of near it. And then again, use well draining soil. It likes to dry out. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about some plant products to have on hand. I think really any houseplant parent could benefit from using these, but if you're getting started, these are the things that you may want to look for when getting set up. And again, I'm going to say this one more time. I know I've said it a lot. I know that probably you're all like, okay, we get it. Use a pot with drainage. We get it. But this is really important. It just prevents so much issues. I know a lot of people have trouble finding cute pots that are, allowing drainage. They have the drainage holes at the bottom. A lot of them don't. Make sure that you can get a saucer for something underneath. A lot of really cute pots have matching saucers, and that's a great indication that it will have a drainage hole. So you can also use plastic saucers just to protect your surface, but if you want it kind of a cohesive look, try looking for matching saucers or something a little bit more sturdy. But again, drainage hole is #1 priority in my mind. Next up, we have Dynagrow plant food, and there's a lot of different, options for houseplant food. I like this one in particular. The bottle's probably about this big. It comes in a concentrate, and you can just put a little bit into your watering can, and you're feeding your plants. You're good to go. The 3 numbers on the front stand for the proportion of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So think NPK if you're familiar with the periodic table of elements. The middle number, the phosphorus, will really help any flowering plant. So if you're kind of wanting something for blooming plants and really any indoor or outdoor situation, look for a high middle number. But Dynagrow is really great. The 795 is really perfect for most houseplants. It has low soluble salts, so it can be used on African violets and orchids. It's not going to irritate the more delicate plants. And again, that small container just makes it really easy to store. All right, next up we have rooting hormone. So when you kind of get a lot of house plants and they're getting pretty big, you want to divide them or you want to take cuttings to give to your friends. Rooting hormone is really helpful for making sure those cuttings root, or if you have any broken plants, you want to just stick all those broken parts back in the soil. This really helps ensure that they're going to establish and stay established. What rooting hormone is it's a hormone called IBA, and it essentially tells the plant to produce roots wherever it's in contact with it. You know, again, it comes in a gel and a powder. I personally prefer the gel because you can stick plants in the rooting hormone and then stick them in the water, but the powder is just as effective. It just may be a little bit more messy. All right, and finally, we're going to talk a little bit about insecticides. And with insecticides, I tend to like to use them as the last resort. Like I've tried all the, you know, remedies of like trying to pick bugs off. I've tried to, you know, make the environment hostile to bugs. So I'm like trying to let the plant dry out if it's a bug that likes, you know, moist areas, or I'm trying to, you know, make a more humid environment for insects that like drier areas. But if you have something stubborn that just isn't going away, I really like to use systemic granules. This product here from Bonide actually lasts up to 8 weeks, and it's really convenient because you're not spraying anything, you're actually dusting the granules on the soil and watering them in. So if you're kind of afraid of, you know, spreading chemicals or stuff like that, it really just stays within the pot and within the plant. And again, it's active for up to 8 weeks. So really any infestation is going to be gone. And it's going to be taken care of after those 8 weeks, because most insect life cycles are a little bit shorter than that. So with that, I want to open up the floor for questions. Feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here so I can look at the chat, because I see we have a couple things happening here. All right, let's see. All right, let's see who asked first. So Nancy asks if there's any benefit to spraying plants to increase humidity, and with certain ones, especially like air plants and you know, those alocasias, anything with sort of like thinner leaves, I do believe so. Sometimes it can be hard to keep the same level of humidity. So if you're really trying to spray to keep the humidity level up, just for, you know, your own sanity, I really recommend just getting a humidifier, because it helps keep that constant humidity there. If you're kind of just wanting to, you know, increase the humidity of one area, spray bottle could work for you. And then Nancy also asked if plants like to be near each other. For the most part, yeah. So if you have an area that is, you know, sort of dry and you're trying to, say, increase the humidity of that area, basically keeping the plants together will kind of keep the area more humid, and also it looks nice. So, all right. Let's see. I think Catherine asks about a croton that she has that's dropping leaves. It's above a tray of water. So Catherine, I might ask you to actually send a picture of your plant to hello@chaletnursery.com. We can actually kind of take a closer look and just see what's going on there, because it sounds like there could be a couple things that are going on. So I definitely recommend sending a picture of your plant. Either myself or one of our other horticulturists can give you some more specific advice. All right, Lucy asks about watering the Fiddle Leaf Fig. So in general, most plants like to have, again, I'm talking about a drainage hole here. Again, I know I'm probably going to drive you guys crazy, but if you have a pot with a drainage hole and your Fiddle Leaf Fig is in it, when it's time to water it, make sure that you're watering enough so water is sort of dripping out of the bottom of the pot. With Fiddle Leaf Figs, I like to kind of wait until like the first inch or two of soil is dry, and then I give it a good watering. Then Miriam asks when we will be able to get a recording. It should be within the next week or two, I believe. But keep an eye out for our YouTube channel. If you subscribe, it should just be right in your subscription box. All right, Juliana asks if you have a stem and leaf that are brown and don't look good, can you just trim them off if the plant, if the rest of the plant looks good? Absolutely. That can actually be really helpful. If you have sort of a plant that's, or part of a plant that's looking dead, don't be afraid to trim it off if it's all crispy and kind of gross. Dead plant tissue can actually harbor different pests and diseases, so it's really important to actually get those off of your plant and into the trash or the compost or something like that. All right, Lou Ann is asking about prayer plants. Prayer plants are sometimes a little bit harder to take care of. They like a little bit more of a shady environment. They like a lot of humidity, so I would recommend getting a humidifier or even misting them to help them grow. Otherwise, they come in a lot of different styles and variegations and sizes. So they're really cool houseplant, a really good one to collect. But again, they like low light, they like a lot of humidity. Again, drainage holes would be a much needed thing for those. All right, Lori asks, is it best to put the plant pot in water rather than watering from the top? How long should you let them absorb the water? That's a great question. So it really depends. With regular watering, I tend to prefer just watering the plant from the top. And if my plant is like really dried out, like I've been on vacation, I didn't hire a plant sitter, or I've had a really busy week, then I like to soak it completely. What I would do if you're putting your plant pot in the water is let it sit for about 10-15 minutes max, and then let them drain really well. Don't let them kind of like sit in their own water. Basically, I would try and empty the tray like half an hour after you take it out of the water. But that is a viable option. If that works better for you, then you go for it. And then Jen is asking about care tips for Calathea, and that's actually the scientific name for the prayer plant. So again, I think the brown leaves that you're talking about is just from a lack of humidity. And I would recommend either spraying them or putting them next to a humidifier. You can definitely cut off the brown parts of the leaves. That will not really affect it at all. And then Sue, you're asking about a Chinese evergreen. Again, I'd recommend just sending us some photos at the hello@chaleznursery.com email address, just so we can really specifically look into the issues that you're having and kind of come up with some solutions that are tailored to you and your home. Charlene's asking about Staghorn Ferns and this white powdery substance that's on it. So that happens naturally with Staghorn Ferns. It's not an issue. I believe it's some sort of way to protect the plant from either like pests or other conditions in the wild. You don't need to remove it, but if it is getting like a little bit messy, like it's falling off around your pot, you can wipe it up, but I wouldn't be scraping it off the plant. And then finally, Sue is asking if we should be fertilizing now. So again, it really depends on the plant. If you have an actively blooming African violet, then yes, probably you should be giving it a little bit of fertilizer to help it produce those flowers and keep producing those flowers. Otherwise, right now, I wouldn't be fertilizing your plants that much unless you're seeing like actual like symptoms of nutrition deficiency, like all the leaves are yellow and you're not having any issues with watering, or your plant's just not like growing at all. I would wait and probably until March or April to start fertilizing your plants again. The increased sun and day length actually helps kickstart the growth. And if you feed your plants now, it's sort of like giving your kid a soda before they go to bed. So you want to just kind of hold off until spring, and then in spring, the houseplants are kind of going to be more awake and more receptive to the benefits of fertilizer. And then I want to do one last call for questions here before I sign off for the day. So if you have any additional questions, anything that you want to ask about, and certainly if you think of things later, the hello@chalet email address, or even you could give us a call. I believe the phone number is 847-256-0561. Again, that will be another way to get in contact with one of our experts, and they can answer the questions for you as well. So again, any other questions? Oh, wait, there's a Q&A portion. Here we go. All right, looks like Mike is asking about keeping mother-in-law's tongue from bending. That's an issue that I have also had before. Generally, if it's bending, it's probably trying to lean towards the light. So I would kind of put it closer to either a window or a grow lamp. If you've had any like breakage or anything, and it's sort of, flopping a little bit and it's like cracked, I would actually just cut that part off. It's not going to get better, unfortunately, but you can stick that cutting in the soil and then get another plant. All right, any hints for foxtail and asparagus fern? Also from Mike. All right. So asparagus fern, I believe they sort of like a more humid environment. So using a humidifier, misting them would be a really good idea. I believe the foliage is a little bit more delicate. So if you're seeing some browning, even with that increased humidity, maybe even try using distilled or dechlorinated water. To dechlorinate water, all you really need to do is just let a bucket of water sit out overnight, and that causes the chlorine to evaporate. Sometimes plants just don't like the chemicals that we humans put in the water to sanitize it. All right, Beth is asking about Aerobic spiralis, or the fizzle sizzle plant. I am actually not familiar with that variety, but I do have your contact information, so I'm gonna do a little bit more insight and research for you and get back to you on that, okay? So let me just write that down. All right, Sue is asking, why do leaves turn yellow, brown, and drop? So there are several reasons for this. So usually if people call in or email in with this question of like, why is my plant yellowing? Why is my plant, dropping leaves? There's a couple different things. And so I usually have to ask a couple more questions. Generally, the reasons are either underwatering or overwatering. But it could also be a change in environment or some sort of transplant shock. So this happens a lot with Benjamin figs. Sometimes during the winter, the heat kicks on and the plant owner doesn't realize that it's next to a heating vent. And then all the leaves fall off just because the plant's like, whoa, I don't like these changes in temperatures that are so dramatic. So that is definitely a reason. Sometimes when plants are overwatered, the roots themselves actually rot out and they're unable to absorb water. So it looks like it's an underwatering issue. The plants can kind of get a little bit crispy, but if you look at the base, usually the leaf is yellowing before it turns brown. And then if things are just turning brown immediately, sort of like it's browning at the edges, it's getting crisp immediately, that's usually a sign of just plain underwatering. But again, like if you're having issues with leaf yellowing and stuff like that, send us in a picture and we'll ask you a few more questions and kind of narrow down what it could be. And then Alice is asking about her, so similar question, Alice is asking about peace lily leaves turning yellow. Again, it could be, usually in this sense, it is overwatering if the leaves are just turning yellow. But again, send us a picture at hello@chaletnursery.com via email, and we can take a look. We can have a chat and definitely narrow down what's going on here. And then Lori is asking what my favorite potting soil / mix is, and if one kind is okay for all plants. So generally, I like to get potting soil without any fertilizer in it, just because I like to more closely control that. I like potting soils that have a lot of perlite, a lot of maybe even like a little bit of bark pieces and peat moss in it. Chalet mix is a really good mix, but personally in my world, because I am a horticulturist here, I sometimes like to just mix my own. And it really depends on what type of plant I am planting. For most applications, for most plants, all-purpose potting soil is going to be perfectly fine. It's not a huge deal to use all-purpose potting mix with these plants, but for cacti and succulents and palms, I like to have something with a little bit more sand, a little bit more drainage. So keep that in mind. Certain plants like citrus also, they like a lot of drainage. So if you have a plant that does like a lot of drainage, look for something with more perlite, more sand, more vermiculite even. Those are all different materials that add a lot of drainage to the soil and kind of keep everything nice, light, and airy. All right. And Lori also asks, can soil become exhausted? How often should you repot for freshness? Yes, soil can definitely become exhausted. It's really common in greenhouse settings where plants are sitting there for a long time, they're being grown, and the media just starts to kind of get decayed, it's breaking down. In houseplant settings, this usually happens over like 2 or 3 years in my experience, where it's just the soil's kind of harboring a lot of moisture. It's harboring a lot of, maybe even insects or mold or pathogens. So it's really important to kind of like get rid of some of the old soil, especially if it's something that you've had for a long time. You don't necessarily have to clear out all the soil from the root ball, but giving it new soil can really help improve drainage and make sure that all the roots are happy and stuff like that. So as far as how often you should repot, that's going to vary plant to plant. I like to check my plants yearly at the very least, just to see how they're doing. So signs that you need to repot your plant can include roots coming out of the bottom, plants tipping over, soil drying out really quickly. If you're able to kind of like pull your plant out of the pot and the root ball stays in one piece and you can kind of see all these roots at the edge of the pot, that's a really good indicator that you need to get in a bigger pot and give it some new soil. Yeah. All right, and then Sue is asking where she can buy topiary forms to train English ivy. So that's a great question. I think we have a few here at Chalet where I believe like they're like the hoop kind, but you can also make your own out of some wire and some, what's the word I'm looking for? Pliers. If you want sort of a certain shape. You can also just use moss poles and really like sometimes places sell like orchid wire where it's that wire when you buy an orchid, it's supporting the stem. That also works really well for English ivy. But again, you can use a lot of different things as long as it's not going to be breaking down under moisture or is sort of too soft to hold the English ivy. Oh, Lori's asking about what a moss pole is. That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So moss poles are kind of these, usually they're made out of PVC and they're covered in sphagnum moss. So what that does is it kind of provides a moist environment. A lot of vining plants actually shoot out aerial roots to either anchor themselves or grab extra moisture from the air. And what can happen is the plant can grow up this pole and then the roots, because the moss is keeping that moisture on the pole, have a really easy time establishing themselves and sort of attaching to the pole. So again, it's a really great way to sort of nurture your plant into an upright form while still keeping it healthy and, even like giving it extra moisture. So a lot of people just spray down the moss pole for easy humidity purposes. So it's a really easy way to add humidity to your plant's environment, but not strictly necessary. You can actually DIY these, but we do have these in store as well if you're interested. But again, it's pretty cool stuff, actually. It kind of mimics a tree branch in a way where like the bark kind of holds some moisture. The moss does the same thing. Okay, I'm going to do a last check for any questions. Here, just open up the chat again. All right. Juliana is asking, do you know of any plants that would grow well over a radiator? Not directly on it, but on the cover. So be careful here because the radiators, in my experience, can get pretty hot. I wouldn't recommend putting something directly on the radiator, but if it was sort of like hanging over it or you had like a shelf above it, a lot of plants benefit from that bottom heat. So you can, depending on your light situation, I would go for maybe, I would start out with maybe something a little bit easier to care for. That's going to be a little bit more forgiving, like a snake plant or a ZZ plant, maybe even a pothos as well. Just make sure it's not going to get down into the radiator and get burned. All right, and I believe Catherine is asking about best way to get rid of mealybugs and scale. Those can definitely be annoying. I have had this problem. Mealybugs don't like to be wet, so if you kind of spray them down or kind of keep a humid environment with your plants that have mealybugs, they may go away on their own. Another way is, we did this at the greenhouse at Purdue, is we dipped some Q-tips in isopropyl alcohol and we kind of just dabbed each individual bug. Sometimes people just want a quick solution, and for that I would go with the systemic granules if you don't feel like being nitpicky like I have been. Scale is a little bit more hard to get rid of. You can try the isopropyl alcohol thing, but in my experience, they kind of I don't know, it doesn't really seem to work. So I would go with the systemic insecticide if you can. All right, I think. Oh, someone is asking about what does it mean when water comes out of the bottom right away? So that usually means you have very, very good drainage, or it means that your plant's been dry for a very long time and the soil isn't drying or isn't absorbing that water. Sometimes that can happen. What I would recommend in that situation is, I believe someone brought this up earlier about putting your plant in a tub of water for about 10 to 15 minutes and just seeing if that helps make sure things are moist. Again, just check the soil and see, like, is there water already in the soil? Is the soil bone dry? Yeah, but usually that means that the soil is just dried out so much it's having a hard time just absorbing water. Okay, I think that is all the questions. So everyone, I want to thank you for attending. Again, if you have any questions later that you think of, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh my gosh, what happens if this happens? Send us an email, hello@chaletnursery.com, or even give us a call. We'll have one of our experts answer the questions for you. Okay, all right. Well, again, thank you for everyone for attending. Have a great day. Stay warm, stay hydrated, and stay safe.